Well, new at 6, some Northland veterans were celebrated last night, sharing their musical talents in a concert. Challenge America is a national nonprofit that connects veterans to resources such as musical therapy and art. In the Northland, St. Louis County used $12,000 in criminal forfeiture proceeds to participate in Challenge America. The 6th Judicial District Veterans Treatment Court connected veterans with Challenge America and music. And last night, graduates of the program got together and shared their music and shared their message of healing.
When they spoke before their performance last night, I think each one of them talked about how wonderful it was for them to be able to open up about their experience, to talk about things that they've kept very deep inside.
Around 15 veterans participated in the program this year. They performed 8 songs last night. Half of them were original songs written by the veterans.